Hi guys, welcome back to our third lecture on our series, our second unit, The Foundations of Modern Nations. We are going to continue looking today at some nations as they encountered independence, some of the issues that they had, primarily the division of the demographics within, the population differences in terms of race, in terms of ethnicity. We're going to see some of that turn violent today with three case studies that we are going to be taking a look at. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump directly into it. We're going to begin with South Africa. Now, we talked earlier about some of the problems that African nations just in general had when they encountered independence in the 1950s and onward. South Africa had been originally a Dutch colony. Eventually, it was taken over by the British, who held on to it for a very long time. Even after independence was declared, you had white settlers that had stayed, at this point, multi-generational settlers that were living in South Africa. They had set up a system that is frankly very similar to what we saw in the United States during the Jim Crow era, and that was a system of segregation. They are going to try and create laws that separate white and black citizens of South Africa, and it takes on a little bit more of a unique twist. They will call it apartheid. Okay, now apartheid is very similar to what we experienced in the United States during Jim Crow, but it is a system of legalized institutional segregation among the races. Everything was segregated. The beaches, the water fountains, the buses, everything. This started as early as 1948, where you had the first legalized segregation laws go into place. It classified individuals according to their place, their race, and placed limitations on their rights depending on where they lay on the spectrum. Now, the white minority here, and it was less than 20% of the overall population, for the next few decades would control the vastly larger black population with everything they did. What you had is a situation then where the whites had all the best jobs, had all the money, and the vast majority of South Africans had poor housing, had less education, and just overall such a negative experience that their life expectancy was actually much lower. So it's not. It does have a very real effect on people's lives, and again, just even the overall life expectancy was diminished for those that were in this lower class, even though they're the vastly majority in South Africa. In 1961, South Africa would leave the British Commonwealth. So, we talked about how Britain had gotten rid of their empire following World War II. South Africa becomes fully independent in 1961. Partly the reason they left the Commonwealth was to retain this system of segregation they had developed of apartheid. They went all in at this point, and this would be the most distinguishing feature of South Africa for those looking in on the outside. That does not mean that there wasn't resistance. The people within South Africa, both in both nonviolent and violent manners, began to fight back. We're going to talk really quickly about the African National Congress. This has kind of remnants of what we saw happen in India as they began to push for independence. But the ANC, who will be it's going to stay a part of this story until the very end. The ANC becomes at first kind of an activist group. Eventually, it's going to become its own political party. But we see early on, like I said, both there were nonviolent means of protesting, but often it would spill over into violence. We will see incidences of guerrilla warfare, of urban sabotage, basically, trying to bring down this legalized segregation and try to end apartheid in any way possible. Now, Nelson Mandela, a name that today is very, very familiar with many people, Nelson Mandela will become one of these early leaders of the ANC, and he will start a campaign which he calls the Defiance Campaign. And this was the first large-scale resistance to apartheid, and it did involve some violent action, including car bombings and arson, things like that, against the government. Now, Nelson Mandela would be arrested for leading this hopeful revolution, and he was in prison in 1962 for life for trying to overthrow the state. Now, while Mandela was in prison, by the time we get to the 1980s, we are going to see that there's a global push. And again, I think this is an effect of globalization, of all of us starting to communicate and become a little bit more interconnected. There becomes an international push to end apartheid in South Africa, and at the same time to free Nelson Mandela, who kind of becomes this symbol of this resistance to apartheid. Many nations across the world are going to start, stopping trade with South Africa to try and put economic pressure on them. In 1988, there's a huge concert that is held, a benefit to try and bring attention to the apartheid system in South Africa. And this was on Mandela's 70th birthday. Over 600 million people tuned in to watch this concert in raising funds for charities in Mandela's name. And at this point, he really became a household figure. This symbol of oppression, this man who had been jailed for the majority of his life against this terrible regime that was still pushing segregation. It's hard to imagine. We're here in the 90s that we're talking about. I know to most people watching this, at least those in my class, I know you guys think the 90s is probably ancient history, but it's insane for me to think about a legal system of segregation like apartheid still being active in the 90s when I was a child. So this is not ancient history. This is something that is very, very recent. Now, with the international pressure, the government does take some actions to try and alleviate that pressure. First of all, they will lift a ban on the ANC. They allow them to participate in politics, and eventually they will release Nelson Mandela. After 27 years, he is released, and he will immediately become kind of the center point of this push to end apartheid. In 1992, a vote was given before white South African voters, and overwhelmingly, they did vote to end apartheid. 2 years later, they would have the first free elections in South Africa, and Nelson Mandela was running as president of for the ANC party, and he would be elected president. So you have this man who has been in prison for 27 years for fighting against this racist government. Within 2 years, he's released, and all of a sudden is now the leader of that country. So a tremendous positive change in that nation with the end of apartheid. So again, we see here in this case study, where race really becomes the central issue in their independence push. Let's move on a little bit further north to Rwanda. Rwanda is a very tiny country in Central Africa, and I had mentioned them in a previous lecture. The Rwandans were the target of colonialization very early on by the Belgians, and the Belgians moved in and basically divided up the two groups within Rwanda. Historically speaking, they were basically the same. There were these two ancient terms of Hutus and Tutsis, which you can see there, referred to the Hutus as farmers, the Tutsis as cattle herders. But for the most part, they were the same people. They shared a common language, common race. But the Belgians came in and divided them. They basically selected those that, and they use physical characteristics. They would measure people's noses. They would look at the size of their, or the length of their, nose to basically classify them as a Tutsi or a Hutu. They would look at the shade of their skin, their eye color, and they began to segregate people according to these basically two groups. Now again, they were the same people. The Belgians kind of created a lot of these differences, but then they turned to the minority and they gave them a position of power. Now, once the Belgians would leave in 1962, the Hutus, who had the majority of the people there, but had been kept in a kind of a minor role, they were never given, government positions or put in any position of power. The Hutus basically took over in 1962, and they forced all the Tutsis to leave. About 300,000 people left this small country. By 1990, you started to have a desire to return by the Tutsis, and they began launching attacks into Rwanda from the north. Now, you still had some Tutsis living in Rwanda at this point, and it's at this moment that there tries to be some negotiation. You had kind of the rise of what became known as Hutu power. The president of Rwanda really leaned on this fear of Tutsi invasion and basically created this real big push, anti-Tutsi push, which really labeled them as enemies of the state. He passed certain laws that outlawed people marrying between Hutus and Tutsis. And eventually, what we're going to see is organized killing of Tutsis in small villages at first, but it is going to extend to the cities. Now, in 1992, the president is going to negotiate basically a peace treaty with the Tutsis. And as his plane left the airport to go sign this peace agreement with the Tutsis, his plane was shot down and he was killed. He was assassinated. That immediately launched the hardliners, those that were very anti-Tutsi, to basically condemn the Tutsis as having carried out the attack, which, by the way, we have no idea who actually attacked the president, who actually killed him. But basically, we see the Tutsis that are still in Rwanda get targeted, and the Interahamwe was the government-backed Hutu paramilitary organization. I know that's a lot of big words there. So basically, the government was giving the Hutus the authority to launch attacks on the Tutsis, and this, for a poor country, while there were many guns, AK-47s, what is going to take place here, sorry, I keep having to pause because of announcements. What ends up happening here is that the Hutu power movement is going to start targeting Tutsis. And, after this assassination, they are going to declare open war on the Tutsi people. Within hours of the assassination, the Interahamwe and basically the Hutu army are going to begin taking out all the Tutsis that live in Rwanda. Now, I want to remind you, the Hutus and the Tutsis, there's no true physical difference between the two. They were all Rwandans back in the day. It was the Belgians that kind of divided these people and put Tutsis in positions of power. But that didn't matter because the Hutus were out for revenge. Within 6 weeks, there were over 800,000 Rwandans that were murdered. And that is a rate 5 times faster than the Holocaust. And what made this even worse was that this was often very violent deaths. These were bands of gangs that were going around from house to house with machetes. They were brutally killing people in their own front yards. They were setting up roadblocks, checking IDs. If you were a Tutsi, they would drag you from the car and they would murder you on the spot. This is a genocide. They were trying to eliminate every Tutsi that lived in Rwanda. And, this is one of the more recent genocides we've witnessed. I'm just always reminded here, we talk about the Holocaust, and we always like to say, never again, never again. But here we are in the 1990s, witnessing a genocide take place. And what response do we get from the Western world? Frankly, none. They really wasn't any interaction. There wasn't a push to end this genocide. Of course, it did happen rather quickly, but ultimately the Western world stepped back and watched these people kill themselves, and almost 1 million Rwandans dead at the end of it. The United Nations would send people in, but they were not authorized to actually stop anything. They were just sent in as kind of a peacekeeping force. The only way they were allowed to actually fire was if they were fired upon, self-defense. By July, you did have an end to the genocide. The remaining Tutsis up in Uganda invaded and helped end the genocide. But there were over 1 million people killed in this genocide in total. 94% of them were Tutsi. This would leave about 500,000, 400,000 orphans on their own, their parents killed in this genocide. Just a terrible, terrible moment. And again, it's amazing to me. This is in my lifetime that something like this could happen, and just so little regard for human life. The final case study we are going to look at today deals with the country of Yugoslavia. Now, Yugoslavia had been created after World War I, and it was incorporating a large area of what had been the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but it absorbed a lot of different ethnic groups within a singular country. This era from ancient times had been kind of a crossroads between Asia and Europe. And what you have is the citizens that lived in this area were descendants of people from all different ethnic groups. But by the time you get to the 1990s, you have Serbs, you have Croatians, you have people from Slovenia. So all of them are kind of crammed into a singular nation. Now, over the decades following World War II, this became a communist or a socialist nation, and it was led by a dictator named Joseph Tito. And once again, I kind of alluded to this earlier. Tito, even though he was a dictator and was brutal to his people, it did kind of keep a lid on the jar of these ethnic tensions. They didn't really flare up because nobody really wanted to mess with Tito, with the dictator. So what ends up happening is after he dies and after the Soviet Union collapses, this is a great map showing you all the different ethnic groups located within what was once Yugoslavia. So you can see there you got over 10 different ethnic groups that are present. And a lot of these it's not just issues of race. It is, religion as well. You got Christians versus Muslims. You got, just all different types of people that are jam-packed into a very small area here. Now, in 1992, after the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of these nations in Eastern Europe began to declare independence. And Yugoslavia, with all of its ethnic tension, did start to dissolve. You had nations like Slovenia and Croatia. They wanted to break off, and they wanted to form their own nation based off of their own ethnic background. Now, the man who tried to stop them was this guy, Slobodan Milosevic. He was elected the president of Serbia in 1987. Serbia was kind of the largest country in what was the former Yugoslavia, and he is going to try and keep the country together. He does not want Croatia or Bosnia breaking off into their own country. So he is going to basically launch a war to try and keep them as a part of Yugoslavia. Now, the result here is that over the next 10 years, we will witness one of the deadliest conflicts, the deadliest conflict in Europe since World War II. There will be 140,000 people dead. There will be 140,000 people dead, and they die, frankly, brutal deaths. We're going to see that this war, as there's multiple phases to this, we're going to see not just murder and genocide, but we're actually going to see rape used as a tool of war in this conflict. Just absolutely horrendous. So all of this really begins in 1991. And like I said, the nation of Croatia and Slovenia tried to break away in 1991, and Milosevic will call to basically really declare war on Croatia and Slovenia as an attempt to basically try and protect the Serbians that live there. This is getting into, again, kind of the ethnic, issues that are present within this multi-ethnic society. So the first of the Yugoslav wars was the Croatian War of Independence from 1991 to 1995. And basically in an effort to block Croatian independence and to try and grow the size and scope of Serbia, Milosevic calls for a war against Croatia. And you can see the path of that invasion as it took there. The sad part is that civilians were targeted in this, that basically they... people are going to be shot down by snipers. I mean, there are brutal videos of kids walking to school, that are being shot and killed in the street. It was just There was such bitter animosity towards one another that it is just brutal murder after murder. In this first phase of the Yugoslav wars, 40,000 people are going to be killed, 600,000 are displaced from their homes. The next war came with the next country to the southeast, Bosnia, and this was one of the largest in the former Yugoslavia. You can see the breakdown, a lot of different ethnic groups here. You had a majority of Bosnians are Muslim. The second close minority is Orthodox Christians, and then you had Catholics. So you had, three major different groups, different religious beliefs that are all kind of vying for power in this. In 1992, they tried to hold a vote to basically decide whether they should join Serbia or whether they should become independent. And basically Milosevic used it as an opportunity to try and go into Bosnia and to try and kill all of the Muslims that were present in Bosnia. So you have this Orthodox Christian politics leading an attack on the Bosnian Muslims. And some of the heaviest fighting we've seen since World War II. 100,000 people killed in this phase of the war. 50,000 women raped. And again, the term that was used was ethnic cleansing to try and clear out the Bosnian population. Sadly, rape has been used as a tool of war for forever. But what we saw was that it was actually being ordered by the Serbians in this war for the soldiers to do that to women that they encountered. It's at this stage that NATO and the United Nations both get involved. Basically, they're attacking Serbia to try and get them to stop the bombing. Milosevic would stay in power, though, until 2000, where he was overthrown and eventually arrested on war crimes. By the time you get to the end of the conflict, around 2000, 2001, all told, there are about 140,000 people killed in this phase, 4 million refugees displaced. And in 2006, we're getting into some recent history here, you had the final two break off of Serbia, forming the actual state of Serbia, but then also the state of Montenegro. Milosevic would die in prison of a heart attack, I believe, awaiting for his trial on war crimes. All told, there has still been prosecutions of these war criminals. 161 people that were involved with the Serbian military have been prosecuted for war crimes, including the ordering of rape and torture of the Bosnian Muslims, and they have been brought before the International Criminal Tribunal. This is, again, not ancient history, but another example as to how when independence is won, that does not mean that the struggle often ends. And frankly, in many cases over the last half century, it's just been the beginning of conflict. So kind of a tough way to end today's lecture, but I hope you guys have learned a few things. And as always, if you have any questions, please shoot me an email. I'd be happy to get back to you. Thanks.